Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome every one of you, and welcome to the Swamp family, Jake, Judy, Condolence. We're so happy to welcome you to the National Museum of the American Indian, and we're honored today by the presence of such a distinguished American Indian family, a distinguished Haudenosaunee family. So thank you so much for coming. This is a family of people that get out a lot, speak a lot. Jake has been all over the world, especially Judy as well. Condolence starting to fill in the miles as well. Jake Swamp served in the Mohawk Nation Council for nearly 40 years and was called upon to travel the world representing Iroquois diplomacy of contemporary times. Also, he and Judy and family founded a major international NGO, the Tree of Peace Society, to carry the message of peace and righteousness to the four corners of the earth. So they are well-known people, but still we are very privileged today because it is always a rare opportunity in a place like Washington, D.C., to hear from traditional people who live the life, reside in a native community, in this case the Mohawk Nation at Iroquois, and are part of an ancient Haudenosaunee way of life that persists into the contemporary institution of the longhouse. So welcome, Swamp family. We're honored by your visit. The Six Nations, also known as Iroquois, of course, use their own indigenous name, Haudenosaunee, meaning people who build the longhouse. They are the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Tuscarora, Cayuga, and Seneca. Together, they comprise a population of perhaps as many as 100,000 or so. It's hard to know these census figures, what's accurate and what isn't, but around 100,000 people residing in some 17 reservations or territories, mostly in the geography of what is now known as New York State and the Canadian provinces of Quebec and Ontario, and also with reservations in Wisconsin and Oklahoma. Influential way beyond their numbers, the Haudenosaunee developed, as the late Seneca scholar John Mohawk liked to put it, a way of life that is a thinking tradition. That is an intellectual tradition based on a clear perception of the world translated into a philosophy of life. Jake Swamp and his family naturally represent that philosophy, which is embodied in a classic human, oral, and now written document called the Great Law of Peace. Among the American founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin wrote about these early treaties, about the marvel of the forest diplomacy they represented, and went on to publish a book of early colonial protocol represented by the Six Nations. Consistently, as we read the words of the interpreters of the early treaties, the first 200 years or so of the colony, translating the recitations of the native chiefs, we hear the introductions of the words of the Condolence ceremony. Historically, this most American of diplomatic protocols was used for the last time during the 1794 transactions at the Treaty of Canandaigua, which was called for by George Washington, which in fact is known as Washington's Covenant. There's much history in all of this, very rich, very American, and most importantly, very much alive. A living tradition, ongoing, creative, wise, and useful. We at the National Museum of the American Indian, again, are honored to present the Swamp family and their messages because it appears very much that the world needs to hear such messages. Some of you had an earlier description of the program. I'm going to reverse the order to start with the younger generation, then ask for words from the women's side of the house, and then go to our main speaker, Chief Jake Swamp, President of the Tree of Peace Society. So we're celebrating here today, in particular, the mounting this week of the Mohawk Chief's Kustoa, or headdress of honor and position in the Chief's Council, which is to be found in the Potomac Atrium at the entrance to our museum. It was installed this week. This circular pathway of mounted vitrines conveying the museum's core messages. It is a contribution of Haudenosaunee Swamp, gifted artist, dedicated practitioner in the longhouse culture, and a speaker, faith keeper of the longhouse. Haudenosaunee was last year appointed to the inaugural chair in Indigenous Knowledge at Trent University. A new chairmanship signaled to bring worldwide attention to the university's already renowned Indigenous Studies program.
Saigo sa wagwego, skahondone ni waksanodo, wagata yuni, waganya garaga, akozas ni nume ni duwagartegyo. Negadit kayeli ne nuomani salade, net kayeli ne o duwagela te ne, dawat ka venega na wala dunsla. Negadit kayeli ne chinedjo go nuwe, sa wagat dalolo nuomani salade, kayeli o na agwego da duwadada no wala donyo. Neji agwego skana, wajis wagat ve nuomani salade. Negadi oni kayeli ne ona etunuwe na duwade ni gon hayla de negano hola don sla nene jingula shit de gonzala lakos nene eti ni sta jo hanjade nene ji get go gagot ko hage nega de gen hatsla kят de wani salaga de wagwe ni ska na de won de nyo ga go da galedenyo negadi kayeli ona gwe go aska ji de wahpe nuni ne gwani gola da de tinu walados nene eti ni sta jo hanjade da ikdi na ito ge ne gwani gola Daga di ne ona etunuwe na di duwade ni gon hayla de negan hola don sla nene jinigo ga ne golonyo jo hanjade woni jinigo awange go de ne go jo so da no ji no so de de li hay no wago da go do talo nene ga ne golonyo ne ando wagwe ni ga ni gi ando wag na gila e ne ga di kaile etunuwe ni de weta na ngo ha da na wono na ngo nya dato ne ga di oni etunuwe na duwade ni gon hayla de negan hola don sla Gwego skat ne do andawat ka gwego no hola don sla date no hola do nene jinigo yoduni jo hajade nene o de so oni nene ga hiso oni nene ga intosla negadi oni etunu na do de ni go haila de nega no hola don sla nene jinigo yoduno kwatslo nyanyo jo hajade newi eni hoyelo ne squaya dizo ga yage tandulo negadi de squawi nene ono kwaso Negadi kayeli ne ze wagelos kana waktan sla go gan hasene ungwe negadi kayeli ne andu agwe ni skana idu na tanyo ge chide go dawani je hajade negadi ona go go skat na dawat ka mene go no hola don sla date no hola do ne no kwaso ta kidi na ito ge ne go ne go ta gadi ne ona ituwe na ji dawade ni go haila de ne go no hola don sla ne jinya de galio de ge ne go delio da didakindo ges ne je hajade negadi kayeli ne Ogya ge got ni honaza stano ogya ge ladi gowanos negadi de tinu holado nene godielo da kidina ita ge ne gwani gula da gadi ne ona tinu we naji da wade ni gula ela de ne gon holado sla nene jinya de galon do de ge ne galon da su yoduni je hajade negadi ona gwe gwas ka ji de do we nuni ne gwani gula da de tinu holado nene ogela su da no oni ne got ko gwana ne waten yosno da kidina ita ge ne gwani gula Dani gadi ne ona etunuwe naji dawade ni gon haila de negan hola don sla nene ena gadi go de no gista dinyo go de no ges nene oji da gon sego galanios la de la nota negadi anka gweni skana ido no tinyo ge ji de go da wani je hajade negadi ne ona gwe go aska ji de wa pe nuni ne go ni gon la da de tin hola dos nene oji da gon tan ne got go gwana nene agwex nios no do da ki di nai to ge ne go ni gon Dani gadi ne ona etunuwe na jida wade ni gon laila de nene gon hola don sla nene gaeli ni ogwana le to dian takwa nene gaeli ne gawe lage o la so neji sego aze sununi ji ola le de gadi ona gwe gwaska jida wa we nuni ne go ni gon da de tinu hola dos nene o la so da kadi nai to ge ne go ni gon Dani gadi ne ona etunuwe na jida wade ni gon laila de ne gon hola don sla nene ji at the watsotos na gwadi to dian takwa Nene eti sotogo la de wana dages. Ne ji sego azes nuni jagana golanyo. Oni sego sagodi to la lago nene dos dagano hajotka we nene gaji ni awanos. Nega di ne ona gwego aska ji de dwa we nuni ne gwa ni gola da de tino walados nene eti sotogo la de vela sta kedi na ito ge ne gwa ni gola. Da ne gadi ona eti no we na ji de wade ni gola ela de nene gano waladon sla. Nene degani degala kwala ge jigalon ya dage. Nene e chitawa chia ke neka kalakwa. Dana oni nene e tisota sata neka o ni dalage. Nega di de dili hai na waga de goswa te don hage jigalon he dage. Nene kia doan hisa lage oni kia doan sandage. Dana gadi ona go egwas ka jin dua we nuni na egwa ne gonla dan de tino walados nene tigni da galakwa lage jigalon he dage. Dai kadina ito hage ne egwa ne gonla. Dana gadi no ona etenu we na ji dua de ni gonla ila de negana waladon sla. Nene jinigo Georgisto Colonial Jagolon Hedage, Nede Deli, Nawago, Nene Tisota Sata Neka, Oni Delage, Daigoswate Dohage, Jagolon Hedage, or Glass Nahaniga Hawi. Nega di Ona, Gregoska Jid, the Dwarf, Nuni, Nego, and Nigola, Dan, Dayton, Holados, Nene, Gistano Quasu, Dai Kadina, Tohage, Nego, and Nigola. Danigadine Ona Tenue, Najidwa de Nigola, like the Nagan Holadon Slut. Nene ga elini hona gwedege ladilu ya ge lono nedi kia nya dage skana dono dunyo. Nega di ki ni gon hale ne skana din ai dono dunyo ge. Nene ka don his alage oni ka do wasandage. Nega di ona gwaska jide dwa we nuni nego ni gon da de teno waladas nene ga elini hona gwedege ladilu ya ge lono dai kidina ito ha ge nego ni gon. Dani ga di ne ona teno we na jide wade ni gon hale la de nene ga no hola don sla. Nene is not galon yadi to the nocte laguani, nene saguaya dizo. Negadit kail, nene yakanaga de to doctani, nene giniji law in the dan ojo hajade. Negadi ona grego scatna and the watka when negano ladon sala dachi the one volado, nene saguaya dizo galon yage tandalo, daikadina iton genego and guna. Daugadi ne ona tagadina galiwa queni, nejiwa galiwan hodungo, no one is a lade. Negadi tugadina gali what queni ne. Jiwa de kawana kwe nene jine jogo nuwe so gya dalo no ni salade dai kadina ito gene gwani gona ona gadit kai nene de go na deni nene jino hodo go nuwe de go ni na go ne gadi oni ne gali wan da kwa ge ne on de gali wate de nene jino hodo go gyo da nene go nuwe. I was asked to come here today to give an explanation for a piece of my people's teachings that I've shared with this museum. As Jose mentioned earlier, there's a new display in the Potomac atrium where traditional Mohawk loyane or chief's headdress is now available for everyone to look at. And so I was asked to come here today to give an explanation of this item. But first, in our ways, whenever we gather for anything, the things that we are to do, the first thing we are to do is to offer greetings and thanksgiving to each other for arriving here safely and to all of the natural world, beginning with the Mother Earth and everything that grows from her, everything that she provides to us as human beings as we walk upon this earth. And then we move on to the sky, to the sun, to the moon, the stars, to the thunder beings, to the winds. And we give thanks to the four sacred beings who watch over us each and every day and every night to make sure that we are safe as we dwell upon this earth. And lastly, we send our greetings and thanksgiving to our original place of being, what we call Yunhe Uwe, the original place of life. And that is where the Creator dwells. And as I gathered my thoughts on what I would say today in relation to this traditional headdress, there were some teachings that came to my mind that I wanted to share with you. And I thought it was a good beginning to start off with our Ohanda Gali Wadekwa Ganuhwala Dunsla. And first, I'd like to mention where the word Ganuhwala Dunsla comes from. That word Ganuhwala Dunsla, what it means. That word is what we call the giving of thanks. It's central to our teachings as Haudenosaunee people belonging to the longhouse of one family or Ganuhwala Uwe. And the main root word of Ganuhwala Dunsla is Onuwala. And what Onuala refers to is our minds. After each and every passage, I ask that everyone would gather our minds together as one, as we gave thanks to all of the natural world. And agwego skatne andawatka when ganahwala dunsla. As one, we will all give of this thanks. And so, as you notice, my shirt here, I'm wearing this shirt. This is a shirt that I wore at my wedding 5 years ago. And you see the beadwork designs that are beaded throughout my shirt. And I wore this shirt specifically so I could share some teachings with you about our designs. I took a few moments and I walked around the museum earlier, and I noticed that this design was on many items. And what I wanted to share with you about this is this comes from our creation story. They call it the celestial dome. And what this symbolizes here is that there is a separation between the two worlds. This world that we live in here and that place which I mentioned earlier of Yunhe Uwe, the original place of life. And it's this separation. This is also a really central idea in our teachings as Haudenosaunee people. We acknowledge it each and every day of our life. And this idea behind this symbol was so important to our people that we actually designed our original longhouses after it. If you see our original dwelling places in pictures or in drawings, you'll notice that our longhouses were in a dome. And the symbolism of the longhouse is that there is no door, there are no walls, there are no roof. The longhouse is where the sun comes up to where the sun goes down. That is the eastern and the western door. The ground beneath our feet is the floor of this structure, and the sky above us is that roof. So each and every day that we walk in this world, we are always in this longhouse. And one thing that was shared with me as a young boy and was told to me throughout my life by my mother, who's sitting right here with us, was whenever you go to longhouse, to always have a peaceful mind. And so when I was growing up, I used to think about that. If I thought of this longhouse as being a building, I would only think of carrying that good mind when I'm outside of those walls. But also growing up with the teaching of the symbolism of this longhouse taught me to always have a good mind in everything I've done, everything I do, and everything I will do, because I am always in this longhouse. And this teaching comes from us, from the peacemaker, from the Gaina Goa, which my father will speak about later on. And so in relation to the Gastoa, in a similar way, this symbol of the dome was also incorporated into the design of our traditional headdresses, our Gastoas. And I brought my own today, and I wanted to share some symbolism of this headdress which I wear today. And in relation to that word Onuwala, this Gastoa, or our original name for a Gastoa, as I was told by my cousin Sagawanahawe, Gasto Daligili. And what that comes from is when we split the feather, how the feather curls. And when we tie all these bunches of feathers together, it is like creating a body of water upon our minds. And in relation to the tree of peace, the symbolism of the great tree of peace, some of you sitting here may have heard the symbolism, and I'll share a little bit about it. The tree of peace, the tree that was chosen to be the symbol of an everlasting tree, everlasting peace, is the Goa, the tree of great long leaves, or the great white pine, also known as Ohneta Goa or Colonial Goa. And from this tree, there are four or four white roots of peace that spread into the four directions. And this tree was chosen because no matter what time of year, it is always green. And the symbol of this is that no matter what time of year, no matter what year, no matter what day, that there will always be an everlasting peace. And so today I was wandering about and I was exploring this place, Washington, D.C. And I took my children to a location where this white pine is planted. And it was 22 years since I had been there. And 22 years ago, my father planted a tree next to the Vietnam Memorial Wall. And you'll notice, if you look closely, there's one lonesome white pine growing there. And it's to remind us of this peace. And I couldn't help but see all those names on that wall that were sacrificed in the name of war. And I looked to my right and I seen that white pine growing there. And that's what I wanted to share with my children. And that's what I took back from that place, which I had not been since 22 years ago when I was here when it was planted. So it was a nice place to come and revisit. And so another symbol of this tree of peace is that this tree was uprooted. And they say it was a young tree in its beginnings. And this young tree was uprooted. And in the crevice that was created by uprooting this tree, the weapons of war were placed beneath the roots. And the symbolic river, or this body of water, was to take all of those weapons of war away from our people forever. And so in that similar way, when we wear these gastoas, those bad things that we may have on our minds, the negativity that we may be carrying, grief, sadness, when we wear these headdresses, those things can be washed away in a symbolic way. And so for that reason, I like to use the white feathers in my own gastoas. I've incorporated into my own headdress that I'm wearing today, as well as the one that is now in the gallery. The other symbolism of it is that in the Wiskni Honohonjade, or the Five Nations, there are the Ganyak Gahaga, who are where I come from, the people of the Flint, the Onayot Daaga, people of the Standing Stone, the Onadat Gahaga, people of the hills, Gayank Wahaga, people of the Mucky Land, Onondawaga, people of the Great Mountain. And then in the 1700s, the Tuscarora joined our confederacy, following those great white roots of peace. And each of our headdresses are different. For the Ganyak Gahaga people, our headdresses have 3 feathers upright. The Onayat Daaga have 2 feathers upright and 1 down. The Onadat Gahaga have 1 feather up and 1 down. The Gayank Wahaga have 1 feather down. The Onondawaga have 1 feather up, and the Tuscaroras don't have a feather. And another teaching that I got from my mother when I was inquiring about this, my young mind, when I used to ask a lot of questions. And she told me, each of our nations around this world, everywhere, we have special headdresses that symbolize who our people are. And I asked her, I said, how come our gastoas are different? How come there are war bonnets? How come there are many different headdresses that you see? And she told me that so Sungwayat Diza will know who you are when you pass on from this earth. And you will know what your nation is as you live in this world. And so these things were taught to me at a young age. And so today it was a very nice feeling to be able to go and visit that place that I had had helped plant that tree so many years ago. And so now I'd like to, are you going to introduce her? I'd like to introduce my mother. She's going to speak a few words.
Thank you, Haudenosaunee. I just wanted to say that Judy, as the woman, is the heart of the family. Lifelong participant in Mohawk traditional culture from a long lineage of women leaders, healers, and clan mothers. Again, I think we're privileged today to have a person like Judy Swamp here. In a culture where the women have the special responsibility to select and place and impeach the men chiefs, I asked Judy to talk about the qualities sought for in choosing and training and expectations of leaders among the men and chiefs. Judy?
My Mohawk name is Ganlatalubas, which means I take the leaves off the trees. And my English name is Judy. I'm not going to say the last name because that's something that was given to us later on in life where we had to take our men's last names. But the one thing that I would like to talk about is our women and how important they are in our society. The women are the ones that gave birth, and we should be put up in high esteem for that. But we also, as women, have to give a lot of respect and show a lot of respect so that the ones coming up in the future will see that and try to follow that way. I was brought up as a longhouse person, Haudenosaunee, and for many years growing up, I remember all the times that my mother would say, "Now you stay around the house." But I would always find a way to get away and run barefoot towards the river where my uncle resided. Because the way we grew up, my father was a farmer, he was a hunter, he was a fisherman, and he was also an iron worker. And so he was home till we put the gardens in, and then he would be gone away to work. So we spent a lot of time with our uncle, and he was a single parent. And what I remember the most was how during that time, as a little girl, I was always one that was never satisfied with one answer. I had to be several. But I didn't debate with him. I somehow took all his teachings to heart, and he taught me a lot. He talked of the creation story, and he also told me, he says, "I know you came here without your mother's permission." He says, "Because if you had come here with her permission, you would have shoes on." And so there was no way that I could get around him, but he let me stay. He says, "Your mother will be expecting you back in less than an hour, so you make sure that I don't want to hear no arguments, but I would like for you to go home." He says, "I'll walk you back." And I remember at that time, I must have been only about 5 years old. And his house was, well, it was the usual, a road going to the neighbors or to family members. But I remember even back then that it was years later that I asked my mother, I said, "Why is it that I keep feeling that I was there when my uncle got condoled as a leader?" And she looked at me and she says, "No, you couldn't have been there." I said, and then I started to tell her what I had seen. And she looked real shocked at me, and she just listened. She didn't ask any questions. And I told her a story of the condolence of my uncle. And his name was Condolence, his Mohawk name. But his title name was Salahoane. And she told me, she says, she says, "We have been told these things, that they do happen." She says, "You were pregnant. I was pregnant with you." You were not born yet. She says your uncle was condo in June and you were born in August. But yet, I saw what was going on. I even described the old stove they used to cook the corn soup. And I remember the women with shawls on that start to hug and they start to cry. And I asked her about it, and she says the reason why they cried was that they know, hopefully in the far future, that there would come a time when it would be a hardship to condole somebody, that the ways of our people would start to die off. She says, and the reason I think that you were shown this is that you have to keep that alive. And so today, as I stand here, I'm thinking of the role we have as people of a clan. Some of our people, our family clans are here, and one of them is Jose's wife, Ajay and her boys. And I'm proud to know that they are here to share this day with us. And one of the things that we do know is as women, that when we go out and search for a leader, it doesn't take a day, it doesn't take a month, it doesn't take a year. It takes a while because you look at so many things. And to me, it's always been the most important to make sure that we get somebody who's honest, a person who's compassionate, a person who is fair and will not only allow favors for his family, but that he'll deal with things fairly, and a person who has to be of the right clan. And I guess the thing is that the person has to be a very good person, and he has to be a very good family man, because when he is in as a leader, he has to look at his whole clan as his family. And so for 38 years, my husband was asked by my mother if he could take that role, because he's Wolf Clan, to take that role and sit in as a leader for us until we found somebody. But I think what we did was, I think we went to sleep because we found that he's a fine man, and when he went in, we left him in there for 38 years. But the reason that then we had to look for a clan mother. My mother was a clan mother, and she had been put in not very many years after my uncle was. And we always looked at ourselves, the daughters of our mother, that we were her arms and legs. When she needed things to be done, she would look around and she would say, can you do this for me? I need to get a hold of this. And so we all got used to, as a family, to look out for our mother and help her out. And eventually, she became sick. And so she had to look around. She had to review her whole family line. Who would be the next clan mother? Who could take care of this family? Because you don't only look at your family in your home, you look at your whole clan. And that's a big difference. Especially today when we have thousands of people in the Mohawk Nation. It's like, it's almost impossible to be able to look at each and every one, but that you always welcome your clan with open arms. Though sometimes disagreements come about, you forgive, you forget, and you go on, because we know it's not a good example for the little ones. And so when that happened, that she became ill and she could no longer continue her role as a clan mother, I remember that day when she called me and she says, are you busy today? I said, not really. I says, what did you want? And she says, can you come over? And we're not exactly that close in distance, but it was my mother, so I went. And she kind of looked at my father like, she kept looking at the door. Finally, he got up, finished his tea, and he went out. And she looked at me, and we both sat down, and it took her a while, and I just give her that time because I wasn't sure what she wanted to say to me. But what she did was she told me how she had become ill. She says, you all know that I've become ill. I've been in and out of the hospital. She says, I have a heart condition that won't ever really get better, and that eventually I'll be gone. She says, and I want you to accept that. She says, but before I go, I have a big job to do, and that is to put somebody in my place. And she says, I have a lot of daughters. I have taught you well. She says, and some of you are eligible to fill that space. I just looked at her, and I kind of had an idea who she was going to choose. So she started by my oldest sister. And she says, your older sister is already married to a leader, one of our leaders of the Turtle Clan, and I can't really ask her because she's already got a full-time job on her hand. She says the next one has become Catholic, and the people would not accept her. She says our clan would ask question about it. And then she went down, and when she got to me, she looked at me and smiled, and she says, the reason why I more or less shoot your father out was that him and I had a debate. She says, since 7:30 this morning, we've been debating. She says, I cannot understand that you and him kind of butt heads quite a bit. And she says, and yet, she says, when I told him what my plan was, he says, well, I'll tell you what I think. And she just listened to him, and he says, I think the best one would be Judy. And she says, and it really shocked me because you and him can never see eye to eye on things. Why this time when it's a big responsibility? And I asked, I says, could it be that he wants to punish me once and for all? And she says, I don't think so. She says it was very serious. And yet I knew as I sat there who she was going to choose. Because when she got to her, she says, how many times have I walked the road from here to her house down the road? How many times have I walked in her home and they'll be eating because it's haying time, and there'll be all kinds of boys there. And she says, and I look at each one of the boys, and they all smile, some are shy and kind of smile but turn away. She says, and I would not always know who they are. She says, but your sister made them welcome in her home. No matter if there's 20 boys, she would feed them all. And some would even stay overnight because they were there to help, because that's what her and her husband did. That they had a farm, and their table was always set for more than the 8 children that she had. And so she didn't tell me then that she was going to choose her. She just told me that the reason she disagreed with my father was that she says you tend to, she said it in Mohawk, Senaye. It's not a, I was kind of trying not to laugh about it when I think of that word, and what that means is, the only way I could translate it was fanciful, that I would always look for the brighter colors or something that's shiny. And she says, and it's not really a good thing to teach your people to all walk around in all fanciful, was how she said it. And I just smiled at her because I knew myself, and I know she knew me well too. But she says, but I'll tell you one thing. I don't want you to feel bad because I will put one of your sisters in this position. And I thought, how could I feel bad when you're like, you just lifted the world off my shoulder. And she sat there, and she always, not real serious, but she always had this calm look about her. And she looked at me, and then she started to cry. And I thought, Doris, don't cry, because I think you're making the right decision. And what she laughed at me about was that I knew and I mentioned my sister. She says, how did you know I was going to choose her? I says, because she's the one who's most suitable. But what happened as time went on was that she tried for 12 years to get us together. We have to get somebody to take that position. She says, I took it temporary. She says, it's a lot of work. I don't see you coming together to help as much as all of you should. I says, all you had to do was ask. She says, I shouldn't have to ask because we grew up with the same teachings. We have to all come together and work together as one. And then I think back, and I thought of our mother's words she said it many times, of the kind of person that a man has to be before he can take that position. And she told us, she says, never make the mistake of putting a man who does not have no family in that position. Because the reason why they're so strong in family is that when you have a family, you just more or less learn yourself without being told that you look out for everybody else's children. You know, if they're there and it's time to eat, you don't send them home. You call them in and invite them to eat with you. Says, and if they have a dirty face, you reach out, get a wet cloth, wipe their face. She says, and if their hair needs combing, you do it. She says, that's what we are as women. That's our role. That's the most important role, that we always look after the children and we never let them cry. She says, never let them cry in pain. And today, as I look around me, I find that we are in that position, that the children are crying. Because there's so many changes in our lives, so many things have come about in our communities that myself at this time, I'm just kind of, I don't know quite how to describe how I feel. Kind of numb for a while. But I know when, like the way my mother used to say, when I decide something, if I'm sitting down, I get right up and I'm off running. And that's the reason why she didn't choose me, was that she says you might sometimes forget that you have this, that you owe this family. You owe your whole family the good things in life. And if you run too fast or move too fast, you tend to forget some things. So the day came when our sister told us we have to make a decision. We have to put a clanmother in place. She says, because I don't think I can continue. So they all turned around and looked at all the other sisters and our other family members, our cousins. We invited a lot of them, but a lot didn't show. And they point to me. And I thought of my mother, and I thought, all those years she did teachings for us so quietly that she never made it seem like work. But all of a sudden, I felt like I shrunk about 2 feet, just a little person, but I didn't want to disappoint anybody. So at that time, I accepted. But later on, there was 2 things that made me pull back. And one of them was that in my job, one of the things I was doing was teaching the culture to the students, the many students. And this young girl got up and she asked me, she says, you know, she says, I look forward to your teachings every time you come in. She says, but the one thing that hurts me, and she started crying, was that if you accept that role as a clanmother, she says, I don't think I could forgive you for it. And I just looked at her and it hit me that what she was saying was true. She might have been only 16 years old, but she was telling me a truth that I had not even really considered and looked at. And that was that Jake and I are of the same clan and we're not even supposed to be married. Because people of the same clan do not marry. And so and it hit me like, I felt like somebody punched me in the chest, and I just looked at her and I could feel the tears, but I smiled and I thanked her for reminding me. And she just looked at me and she says, "You mean I'm only 16, but you're going to listen to me?" I says, "I have to." I says, "Because you're telling the truth that I have forgotten." And so those are the many things that we learn and that we are taught in how to pick a good man. They say you always look at the person who's always out there, always helping others. He does not only take good care of his family, but take care of anybody who's around. If help is needed, you don't have to go and ask him to help you. He'll come. She says those are what we call the natural leaders. She says, and don't overlook that. She says, don't be choosing somebody who comes waltzing in with his ribbons and big headdress, you know, looking around trying to get attention, because she'll fail you. She says, always look for those quieter ones, the ones who think deeply, the ones that always think of the future and doesn't dwell on the past. And so I guess that's what we did when my mother had picked Jake. We kind of overburdened. And the one thing that I have to share is how it was being his wife, and during those years I became almost a mother and father in our home. But I'm determined, even now, I'm a very lucky woman for all the times that the door opens and one of my sons or daughters will walk in, because they're very much at home, and it still has open doors. So I think it's time for me to give up this time and have Jake take my place.
Thank you, Judy. That was wonderful. It's the real thing, huh? Well, Jake has informed me, and as the family has mentioned, that he is no longer sits on council. He's been released from council after 37 years, but I still call him chief. I've known Jake Swamp as a chief of the people since 1976, nearly 35 years, and I don't think I can call him otherwise. Jake, I remember you during the dangerous, proud, and difficult days of the Raquette Point encampment back in 1979 to 81, when the Mohawk women asked their chiefs to stand up for their sovereignty in the face of 400 trooper and vigilante rifles, and how you worked so diligently to bring that crisis to a peaceful end. I think that's been your job, your role, your duty many times, as it is for all of the council chiefs of the Haudenosaunee. I remember you in Geneva and Rotterdam, other places where you have stood for the people. And since then, you have circled the whole world, planting millions of trees and teaching millions the Haudenosaunee message of peace. And for that, I'm very proud to call myself your friend. Please welcome Chief Jake Swan.
Thank you, Jose, and I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I guess I lost 2 inches in height when I broke my back years ago. Afterwards, I shrunk 2 inches. And I'm always complaining about my long pant legs. Judy's always fixing it. Today, we're here to talk about the great law of peace. It is so evasive, meaning the peace in our world. And we need to come to terms with how do we bring our world together into one body, one heart, one mind. It is very extensive to talk about the great law of peace. We went on a pilgrimage one time, which I led, a group of people from the Grand River and elsewhere. We took along some buses. And we went back to where the peacemaker was born. And we did the history. It felt so good to walk and to go to the places where the peacemaker had been, knowing at the same time what a turbulent life he must have led. Because beforehand, there were so many areas of violence that were happening. The things that he had to encounter. When I think about those things, I think about today, our world today. And back in 1984, I decided to go out into the world planting trees of peace because this would give me the opportunity to talk about the great law of peace in front of different audiences that may be able to listen, mainly to gain new experiences of how do we come to terms with what's happening in our world. And I have come to the conclusion that our world and its people have 80% in grief. Because people in grief experience different things in life. For one thing, symbolically, when we have a great loss, it brings tears to our eyes or our vision. And when we are teary-eyed, we have a blurry vision, not being able to recognize what's in front of us. Secondly, whenever we experience a great loss, our hearing becomes stopped. We cannot communicate clearly any longer, for our mind is positioned on our losses. Therefore, it is hard to hear under those conditions. When we suffer a loss, it is hard to speak because something grabs us in the throat. And it lives there. And it's hard to speak because of that. So early on when we encountered the new people that came to this land, they were carrying much grief in arriving here. Things that happened where they came from. They were running away to find a new way of life. And so our ancestors were pretty knowledgeable about feelings. So as these people and our people started to make agreements of how they're going to live together, they used to always spend some time to address the areas of pain. And they would say, our brothers, we haven't seen you in a very long time. Perhaps you may have encountered an experience of loss in your life. But we cannot have an agreement unless we have clarity between us. And so that's what they did. We call it the 3 areas that must be covered. And that will bring clarity to everyone. They say, we take you by the hand and we reach to the sky and we bring forth the purest cloth that we could find. We'll bring it to you and we will wipe away your tears so that your vision will be restored for the future. Then after they finish that, then they'll go to the next one. They'll say, our brother will take you by the hand, and we will reach to the heavens, and we will find the purest and softest feather that we could find. And we will go to your ears, and we will move the obstacle of grief from your ears. And ask the great Creator up above to stand with you as the new sun rises tomorrow. That everything that makes noise in the world will come to you again. The birds as they sing their song. The wind as it whistles through the branches in the leaves. You will hear that again. It is important. And then he said, now, our brother, this is another. He said, when you experience a loss, it takes away your voice. For something gets stuck in your throat, and it's hard to speak. Therefore, it's hard to communicate. He said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to reach to the heavens up above, and we're going to find the purest water. And we're going to bring that for you to drink. And this water, this pure water, will wash away that lump in your throat. And we'll ask the great Creator in the universe to give you the power that tomorrow morning, as the new sun dawns, you will stand there and your voice will be restored. And so those are only 3 areas, but there are others that we have, especially when they raise leaders, new leaders in our nation. And so I have found in my travels that indeed there is about 80% of our people in grief, not noticing that they are carrying this from day to day, till it has consumed them, and it begins to become a great burden upon themselves. And so what do we need to do? Using the great law of peace and its teachings, I share that around the world. And I try to bring comfort to people who are in distress. For when people talk about the condolences, they suddenly become aware of where they have been and where they need to go in the future. So I've been very fortunate to learn these values and traditions through the oral teachings that are constantly being recited by the elders. Now it's our turn. People my age, it's our turn to teach our youth. And I think my son here has done a very good job in learning. And I think we owe, both of us owe it to my wife Judy, who has had the strength to teach us everything she learned. Because for me, I did not grow up with it. I was a colonized person, and I had to go through much pain to find myself again. But that's behind me now. Today I'm working on a big project whereby we're going to invite all the indigenous people to the Mississippi River in 2012. And I just got back from Ecuador last week. And I shared this knowledge with native leaders, the Mayans and the Kogis and the native leaders in South America. And they like this idea of congregating on each side of the Mississippi River, where we will carry on a very great condolence ceremony to address the pain of the past 500 years. For there is a teaching. One of the condolences says, when you put somebody in the ground, of course there's a mound that is created as you're walking away. They say, do not look back when you turn around from the grave. As you walk away, look back into the future. Do not look back, for you cannot change what's happened. And so this is how I looked at our indigenous people. We're walking like that. We're looking sideways, trying to look back all the time. And so when we live like that, it's hard to share our gifts, our knowledge between each other. We're all isolated in our different places. And we need to come together as one people again. And so that is what the message I brought to Ecuador. And it will become known pretty soon what is going to be happening. The elders in Canada have already accepted the challenge. We're going to the Arctic North. And so today we busy ourselves using the Great Law of Peace. And there are other teachings in other different cultures amongst the indigenous people. And they're very closely linked. So together, we will start to share our knowledges with one another. The tree of peace, as has been described, is true. The greenery represents the peace. It never loses color through the seasons. The four white roots go into the four directions, which means it's going to spread the peace into the four directions to whoever may listen. The greenery of the tree and its branches and its boughs, there are needles hanging on there with 5 tied together. This is where the idea came from to bring together the United States. The symbol of the 5 nations tied together into one heart, one body, one mind, was the teaching that was given to the leaders who were putting together the Constitution of this country. Hardly anyone knows in our country where the ideas of democracy came from. It came from that place, the original Tree of Peace. The original Tree of Peace was applied to John Hancock. They called him Haudenosaunee because he understood the principles. So they decided to give him that name, meaning big tree or sturdy tree. Canesadego gave a speech in 1744 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And he was showing the colonial leaders how to form themselves into an organization. And he was saying, such as ours, for we have been practicing this way for generations and generations. Why can't you do it the same for yourselves? Because it is easier to settle the problems when you talk to one another, not when you bicker amongst each other. Because the colonial leaders were usually in conflict with one another. So when Benjamin Franklin went back to Albany, New York, 1754, they called it the Albany Plan of Union, and the Six Nations went there with their belts, and they explained to them once again. So you can trace how the independence movement kind of started. By 1775, it was really evident that these people are going to break away from their mother country, and they're going to form themselves into an organization, such as what we have today as the United States government. But it cannot stop there, because when we look at the United States government, it is very young. We have to look at the United States as we would look at a 17-year-old boy that tends to get into trouble and get in front of himself sometimes. So that's the way we look at the United States. Now there's another thing too. I was approached by a person in India. He's a lawyer. And he purchased one of those books. And he said, now I know where democracy really came from. So he went around back into India and he asked the judges and the lawyers, the circle he wanders around in, and he asked them, do you know really where democracy came from? No one knew. And that blew his mind, I guess. He said, he emailed me and he said, nobody knew where democracy came from, and we're going to help you now. We're going to let the whole world know. He said there's 221 countries practicing democracy now, and no one knows where it came from. So we have to let them know. And it's true, we've been kind of left out of history as we have come this far. And people in general need to know these principles and ideas. That way we can all feel good about ourselves and go into the future and build a real good future for our children. We always have to talk about our children. That's our future. We always talk about the future generations. Wherever you go, where Native people are, they're always doing it for their children and their children. Seventh generation concept. That's a law that's been given to Iroquois leaders. You must think 7 generations ahead before you make a decision. What does that mean? It means we're bringing security to the children that will be born into the future, so that they may enjoy what we enjoy today. We have to be careful how we live on Mother Earth. For our elders told us that certain things are going to occur, sometimes in our lifetime, sometimes in the future. Many warnings were given, and today one of them have become true. The oil is leaking in the ocean. In the Thanksgiving address he gave us today, it says to the thunder beings, we thank you for the water you bring to us to quench the thirst of the earth. And we also thank you for withholding those things under the surface of the earth that were put there by the Creator, so that if they should ever surface, they would bring much damage to the world. In other words, when we dig up uranium and different things out of the ground, we don't know what we're doing that's going to cause us many, many heartaches and pains. So we have to listen to the elders who have been given the instruction what to tell the people. We have been given the prophecies, but when we talk about it in the public, sometimes they say that's old wives' tales. But when the truth hits, that's when people become worried. You don't know how many phone messages I have received already. Please come to this gathering. We need your help. Talk about your prophecies. Talk about your culture. People don't know. But one of the safest and easiest way to prevent this is to go by the teaching that we were given as children. They said, if you ever arrive at a river or a stream and you're thirsty, you have your cup in your hand. Do not go directly to that water to get your water. Look at the water first and see which direction it flows. After you have determined that, then take your container and you always dip with the current in the direction of the current. Do not ever dip against it, for it will come back on you. So that's a teaching that we follow. In anything we do in life, if we go with nature's current, we will never get into trouble, and we can go on and on and on in our way of life. But we have done so many things against nature.
Bonjour, Nikan. May I have your attention, please? The museum will close for the day in 15 minutes. The museum will close for the day in 15 minutes.
I guess we're getting close to that time. Sometimes I compare myself to them toys where you wind it up. And I'm kind of used to standing up here for a couple hours, but I guess what we can do with the remainder of our time is maybe we can ask for a question period. Maybe someone has a question, maybe a lingering question. That's a response I always get. Oh.
When you go to these other countries around the world, are you invited there by your government, or is it another corresponding piece of organization, peace-seeking organization, right to you?
Well, in this case that I went to Ecuador, we were to visit the volcanoes. Recently, one went off, and that's where we went. And we went there to do ceremonies to acknowledge the volcano. Because this kind of activity is saying to us, you better acknowledge us. So we went there to be thankful to the volcano. We know that's where life came from. We acknowledged that. And we left gifts and things there for the volcano. And a very funny thing happened. It was kind of something that there was an elder from Mexico. He had this contraption in his hand. And as he was praying, when we got there, it was all covered with clouds. So as he was praying, then the clouds started to split. And it opened up the whole volcano. We could see it. And when he finished his prayer, then the clouds came back together. And I knew what it meant, that the volcano accepted our gift. But the volcano covered itself again, saying, you better go and get to work. So that's how I understood that. The only thing that was happening is I had pneumonia before, and I had a hard time with breathing. So I couldn't go on some of those trips that went way up. So, but we got her done. No, we left it up to the Ojibwe people who are the caretakers on the headwaters. It might be in that area. Yeah. Yeah.
Grew up with that culture all the way through right down and we lived in the Green District. Talking about it, we all need to come together as one. And not only today, but for the future of our children. So we have a strong message today that hopefully some of the people here will hear what you're talking about. And have a lot of bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you. Way back.
I was looking at your Peace Society brochure, and I was wondering if you could speak on some of the forms of alternative energy that you're advocating, that you're supporting. I'm from part of upstate New York, a little south of you, and I know that there's been a big lobby in some quarters to drill for natural gas. And I know that other leaders such as Horne and other Haudenosaunee leaders have come out against this. And I just wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, right now we're working on that problem of fracking or something like hydrofrack, yeah. And it's a very bad thing that they pour that water down there. And then so that's what I mean about how we're doing things in life. We're gonna spoil the earth, or we're gonna destroy it ourselves if we don't be careful, you know. So we just have to go out there and teach, and keep teaching. Oh, one more.
This might sound a little crazy, but I heard that in the lore of the Haudenosaunee, that when the Confederacy was formed, on that day and on that spot, there was a total solar eclipse. Is that
It happened prior because the Seneca people liked war so much that the peacemaker needed to give them a sign so that they could become believers. And so there was a total eclipse for 3 minutes. And they traced that back, the astronomer traced that back to 1142. It was in the afternoon in August. I forget what day it was.
I had heard that the Oneida people fought with the Americans in the Revolution. Is that true with all the 6 tribes?
What happened with that is the Iroquois nations, as a confederacy, remained neutral. And then different people came from British and Americans, enticing young men to join either side. But the agreement they had was that they would not kill each other if they met in battle. But it happened in Oriskany, Battle of Oriskany, and it was very bad. So I want to thank all of you for being patient. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everyone. One always hates to put a time frame in elders speaking, and this kind of an event always calls for some limitations. I want to reiterate again that the condolence ceremony that Jake and family spoke about was the primary protocol of treaty making for 200 years. Through the 1700s and the 1600s, and it was used finally in the last treaty of Canandaigua. The oral tradition that we see, and I won't read it now as I had hoped to be able to, but in a book that Franklin published of the treaties of that time, there are exhortations from father to son to remember. And there's an exhortation to the British at one point where they speak to the fact that even though it may seem to the British that the Iroquois were not remembering and did not have writing, and so they would forget these treaty provisions, that in fact then the speaker goes into the philosophy and the practice of oral tradition and the importance of getting it right. And I'm just very thankful and I'm very honored to see a family that got it right. Thank you very much.